Hey, I'm Scott Perdue, and this is Juan Brown. We're
Hey,
doing BSWorks number 6, I believe it is. So number 6, and we're going to cover the B-17 and P-63 midair at Wings over Dallas in November of 2022. The final report's been out for a couple of weeks, and we're going to go through that in detail and kind of see what happened.
I'm here with Scott Perdue of the FlyWire channel. We're going to do the NTSB final report, attempt to untangle the very detailed information. Scott's done a deep dive into the excellent graphics that the NTSB has produced in this final report and attempt to untangle the anatomy that led up to this tragic crash of the P-63 versus the B-17 back on November 22nd of, what was that, Scott, 2 years ago now?
Yeah, 22,
In
2022.
Dallas, Texas.
Let's see. I'll tell you what I'll do is, how about if I share my screen so we can
Yep.
kind of see what we're talking about here, and we'll work off this. So is that coming through pretty good?
Got it loud and clear. Yep.
Okay. So this is actually maybe it's a new format for a final report. I'm not sure. I haven't seen it before. They actually haven't published a traditional final report for the accident, but this one is the Aviation Investigation Report 24-07. And this is about the in-flight collision between the two airplanes on November 12th, 2022. This is just the first page of the report. And what I really wanted to go through here is I want to start off with the Airshow briefing. This is the Airshow briefing notes. This form without the notes on it was handed out to all the participants at the briefing. They all had it. So this is basically how the air show is going to run, what time acts are going to be, what frequencies they're going to use, how long their acts are going to be open or be running. And I believe they were probably maybe around 5 minutes late or so during the show. I didn't follow the whole show, but just there towards the end, I think they were about somewhere around 5 minutes late, which is not unusual at all. And anyway, when you're doing a routine, you're doing a demo. What you do is you trigger off the people in front of you. It's like if the national anthem goes, these guys are already set up, the engines are running, and they go for takeoff, and then the TORA Act would be setting up right after that. The important thing is, and I don't know who took these notes, is you notice it says no tours.
Okay. First point here. You mean to tell me these handwritten notes are the handwritten notes of a pilot at the briefing? These handwritten notes were not made available to all the pilots.
No, all the pilots that are
Had
participating.
was what's typed up.
Yeah, all the
Oh,
pilots.
that's like an F minus kind of briefing guide. It seems like to me. That's just a kind of a general outline of the schedule of events.
Yeah, well, it is. That's what it is. I've seen much more detailed show sequence than this. This is very minimal, and but the important points is a couple. And like I said, this was a pilot that during the show, during the briefing, he was taking notes, and this was uh, his sequence, and he's going to take that with him flying because it also has the important frequencies,
Right.
et cetera, timing, ceilings. A lot of times they run QFE, which is ground field elevation on the alternator, because then it's not what we usually use QNH for that.
So what Scott's saying is when you set your altimeter, when you're on the ground, your altimeter reads 0.
Yes, and then that shows you how many feet above the ground you are. So if you're in the 500 feet, you have a 500-foot floor, or 100-foot floor, or 1,000 feet, or whatever it is. It's real easy to see it and compute, and typically that's done. So somebody took notes and they said no tours during TORA. They said no tours during the T-28s, Trojan Flyers, and that I believe is a factor in the accident. And then down here, 1305, we see the warbirds and what's supposed to progress into the missing man. And so they're going to start off with the Doolittle thing, the rest of the bombers launch, the fighters launch, and then the passes are per AV, per air boss. In other words, he did not brief a show line. He did not brief an altitude, no altitude deconfliction, no show line deconfliction. He didn't brief any of that. He said, it's all going to be on me. I'll call it in real time while it's going on.
So, and tours are going to be allowed during this
exactly right. And
parade.
Yeah, that's exactly right. People paying to go for a ride. And there was a T-34 at the beginning of this bomber parade. And there was a PT-17, a Stearman landing during the accident sequence.
Right.
I just cannot help but feel that's a factor. I'm actually stunned that they did that.
Now, this next line passes per air boss, and there's some handwritten notes. Walk us through these handwritten notes there.
Okay, I think this was, it might have been a B-29 guy taking this, because the arsenal of democracy is the B-29 doing its show. And its engines were running, and it was sitting, waiting to take the runway during the bomber parade, during the accident sequence. And there are photos out there of it there, waiting to go. So they witnessed the whole thing. So I suspect that this is how the passes they were going to do. It's hard for me to read it, decipher it, but it looks like it's 1,000 feet, maybe 1,500 feet, and maybe 300 feet.
Okay, so those are notes that pertain to the B-29 and have nothing to do with the accident sequence. That was an event that was going to happen after the accident.
That's correct, yeah. If everything went well, and that's why I think that this particular sequence, airshow sequence, came from the B-29 guy, because it circles arsenal democracy. This is me, this is what's important to me, and that's generally how you take notes.
Now, do we know, was the passes per air boss, were those passes briefed verbally in this pilot briefing?
No.
Was any of this choreography relayed to the pilots as to what the plan was?
No, I think they just talked about doing dog bone turns, and we'll describe those dog bone turns as we go on. That's how you reposition the flight so you can maximize your time going in front of the crowd. You go one direction, and then you do a 90, 270, and come back down the other direction, down the show line. So you're always you're maximizing your time in front of the crowd. Otherwise, what you do, and it's very common at Oshkosh, you do racetracks. So they do a very complex show where they'll be stacking slow airplanes, say at 300 feet. They got people, like 300 feet, 200, 500 feet, 800 feet, 1,000 feet, and the racetracks are going different directions. So as long as
no discussion here in this briefing of vertical separation, and no discussion of which lines to fly in this parade of flight for the different aircraft.
That's right. Not here. I was just describing Oshkosh, how they do it.
Right.
And here, there was none. It's all up to the air boss. It's all up to what he feels like, how it's working out at the moment.
Good. All right, let's move on to the next slide here.
Okay. So this is the layout. Right here is the air boss. That's where he's located. The crowd is down here. Okay. And the show lines, the first one is this 500-foot line. And if you're flying what they call a class 3 airplane, it's all about speed. If you've got a lot of speed, they don't want you like a jet. Jet's going to be at the 1,500-foot line. And the faster you go, the further out you have to be. So the 500-foot line, we put that for the crowd. And this shows it on the inside edge of the runway. And they were actually talking about on the radio using the outside edge of the runway as the reference line for the 500-foot line, which would add about 100 feet to it. Crowd was back here behind the taxiway. Appears to be that.
On the ramp.
On the ramp. The 1,000-foot line, and that's the big problem here, is this line right here, cutting through the north-south runway and the taxiway right here. And the accident actually happened right about here, this range, right there. So these are the players. They had the B-17 Texas Raiders in the lead. B-24 is number 2. SB-2C Helldiver is number 3, and then the B-25 number 4. I don't believe the Yellow Rose, which is listed as number 5, made it. I don't see any. I didn't see anything in the transcripts or et cetera about them being there. The lead Mustang was Gunfighter, CAF airplane, as well as the number 2 Mustang was all these airplanes are CF airplanes actually. And then the P-63, the other accident airplane right there. Those are the players. And the one doing the lead in both of these situations, the bomber and the lead Mustang, lead fighter, they're the only ones talking. Everybody else is just executed.
They're following lead.
Right. So this is the brown line is the fighter formation, and the B-17 is the blue line, and the other bombers were following the B-17 in trail the whole time. The fighters were not in trail the whole time. They took off right here, went back behind the crowd, and then came back in to the crowd here and crossed perpendicular to it, and then did a very tight turn and down the runway, made a pass. And this thing right here is what everybody calls a dog-bone turn, down on this side. Okay, the bombers had already made a couple of passes. They even did a racetrack right here in the middle. So the fighters come across, make a pass, and then they come here in the dog-bone turn. And they're in fingertip formation. They're close formation. So basically they're in the fingertip, like this. So you have the lead, and then 2, and then 1. Or sorry, 3.
And it looks like you got bombers doing... Okay, they start off with a right. Wow, they start off with a right turn and then get oriented to continue.
Yeah.
Okay, they continue to do right turn here, left turn here.
Yeah, it's complex. What they did is they took off. This is what I think they did. Is they took off and then back behind the crowd here, and then they made a parallel, perpendicular entry like fighters did, then flew over the top here, and then came back around on this side here for a pass down the runway. And they did another dog-bone turn down here on this side. And then they did a racetrack that ended up with another dog-bone turn. And this last dog-bone turn was set up the accident pass. This one right here.
Okay.
Previous to the accident pass. So this is the in the accident or the final report. At 13:19:57 seconds, the air boss issues 3 back-to-back radio transmissions to the fighters. And to me, this is an issue because it's not like when you're talking on the phone or you're talking face to face to somebody. When you're talking on the radio, the faster you talk, the harder it is to understand what people say.
You need concise communications because it's a one-way conversation.
There's a one-way conversation. There's no interpolation. Like right now, we can see each other on the screen, so you can kind of interpolate. Your brain works that way. But if you're just listening, it is much, much harder. So what he does is, and he uses non-standard terminology. Like, you can walk your way up to the B-17. I'm going to break you all out after this, and then you're going to end up breaking left. So you're going to follow the bombers to the right. So you're going to follow the bombers, let's see, to the right, and 90 out, and then you're going to roll back left and be on the 500-foot line. If y'all want to set up for an echelon for a break, so you all can get in trail.
Boy, that is about as clear as mud.
That is about as clear as mud, and the fighter lead agrees with you. He said right here, he said, okay, say again for the fighters, that was not clear. So what the air boss did is he made another non-standard call, but totally different. This one he says, fighters go echelon right, go echelon right, and then the lead fighter responded, okay, fighters echelon right. So that's what he thought was going to happen. So this is where they were in a formation, uh, right there.
When they're getting all that radio communication.
Yeah, that all happened
Across.
right in this stretch right here as they're flying
Okay.
by the show line. This is just the ghosts or subdued lines or the future flight paths.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see that last dog bone turn. We can see what the bombers are doing, and there's this huge gap between the B-17 and B-24, and the B-24 never really makes that up. And I think that has a factor in the accident. I'll talk about it here in a second.
So, can you talk about how do you close the gap in these big bombers? You got 4 giant engines. It's not like you just push up the throttles and close the gap. How do you do it in the big bombers?
The only way to do it in a big airplane like that with a radial engine is really to use geometry. In other words, you can't. You have to use cutoff. You have to use it.
Right. You got to cut them off in the turns to close the gap.
Yeah, because you don't have that much spare power even with 4 engines to make a huge difference in speed. I mean, 5 knots, maybe 10, on that pass down the show line. So
you like to set the power in those bombers and kind of leave them there.
Yeah, you don't jockey the power in a radial.
Yeah.
Big radial, you're asking for trouble if you do that. So the hot wire 12s, the V12s that these fighters are flying, they're a bit. You can move the throttle faster. They're designed to be more responsive that way. But you can see they're still in formation. They're still in close formation. So here we are. The B-17 is getting ready to start its dog bone turn, and the gap between the bombers is huge. The B-24 does close it up, but I think that's a problem as it's developing. Okay, so here we are.
Let's take a look at these altitudes real quick here. The bombers,
all of them at this point in the dog bone turn are higher. I don't remember exactly somewhere.
But the fighters are above the bombers only by about 300 to 500 feet.
300, I think they're about 300 feet or so above. Yeah. So everybody's climbed a little bit. And then what you do is during this sharp turn back here, you use altitude to increase your speed and decrease your turn radius. So you can get back some of that energy. Because you're going away from the crowd, you don't want to go very far. You'd rather stay close in. So you use altitude to help you make this turn, even in a big airplane. So
we have the fighters crossing the bombers way out here on this dogleg turn with as little as 300-foot vertical separation.
Yes. And it was not briefed.
Right.
Yeah. And to me, that's really, really close. Yeah. So here they are. The fighters are just crossing over the number 2 and the number 3 bombers in the stream. The B-25 is pretty far back. And then what happens here is Air Boss says, "Yeah, there you go." Roll it, because he's looking out the window. Roll it back to the left, and I want you to get in front of the bombers. I want you to come through on the outside edge of the runway. And the fighter lead says, "Okay." And then he comes back and says what the winds are. Next one, he says, "Nice job, fighters. You're going to come through first. That'll work out B-17 and all the bombers on the 1,000-foot line." Then ask B-17, "You got the fighters in front of you off to your left." There's an unintelligible transmission from the air boss before the air boss. In other words, maybe the bomber replied, but they couldn't tell who made the transmission. And then the air boss says again, "Nice job, fighters. Come on through." And we'll see a picture of where this is supposed to have happened within a couple of seconds, and what the bomber lead, the pilot in the left seat, was able to see. So
let's go back to that top-down view picture, the last top-down view picture. So there, in all this confusing terminology, he's telling the bombers to pick up the 1,000-foot line.
Yes.
And he's telling the fighters to pick up the outside edge of the 500-foot line. So he's creating another conflict by once again crossing the fighters over and in front of the bombers. Maybe not even over them, but he's crisscrossing the fighters and the bombers prior to coming up to the crowd.
Yeah, and I think that the fighters are operating at a lower altitude path and during their show line pass. So there is an altitude deconfliction issue here, and the show line deconfliction, it's a mess. And when you look at this, look right here. That's where the air boss is. He's looking down.
Yes. He can't tell the spacing.
He can't see spacing. He cannot see it at all. He doesn't know that there's a conflict, that he has generated a conflict between these airplanes. He doesn't even see it.
And he's not even formation qualified pilot to begin with, and he's just setting them up for absolute disaster. Yeah. Belly to belly.
Belly to belly, and then this guy right over here, the steerman's coming in to land.
That's diverting his attention.
So you think about how much time he's actually spending looking at the threat. This is the threat here. He's looking at this PT, at the steerman, as it's getting ready to land, and then the B-29 is sitting right here getting ready to take off. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And he's not really paying any big attention to where the mid-air conflict is going to be.
He's basically relying on the pilots to get it all sorted out themselves. And there's massive confusion amongst the pilots as to exactly what he wants them to do. And the fighters are still in a tight formation at this point. So the number 2 and number 3 fighters are still only focusing on the lead fighter. They do not have the situational awareness ability to look around and see where all the other bombers are quite just yet.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely right. And what they're going to do, and I can understand the lead situation here. He doesn't want to start in trail up here, putting him into echelon and putting it into trail. What he wants to do is put him into echelon here and then use this section of the turn to put him in trail.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a turn. You make geometry work for you. So that's what he's trying to do. So we already talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
This is what the investigation, when they ran through visibilities and positions and stuff, were if the pilot of the B-17 in the left seat had looked out the window, he would have seen the P-51 lead here and the Mustang here. And if he looked far back behind his shoulder, he would have seen the P-63.
And so where are we at in the pattern at this point? Is the B-17 lining up with the runway at this point?
He's lining up with the 1,000-foot line.
Okay.
And so this is...
Okay, right about here. Yeah.
Right about here. This is the next setup. And from that picture, okay, so what we see is here's the Mustangs and the P-63 right here. Here's the B-17 right there. And then in trail are the B-24, the SB-2C, and the B-25. And the B-25 has actually done a pretty good job of catching up, because if you remember, he was pretty far behind. But he's done some good cutoff and he's done some catching up, so he's not terrible now. But the gap between the B-17 and B-24 is still pretty excessive.
Mm-hmm.
And then that, just prior to the accident, this is what the visibility would be: the P-51 lead and number 2. So where the pilot of the P-63 is looking, he's looking at his lead. He's looking at the show line, okay? The 500-foot line is right there. Off the left is the 1,000-foot line, and he's looking at his lead and number 2.
Right.
That's what he's worried about right now. And for just a few seconds, the investigation figured out that he would be able to see the B-17 here.
If he was looking over there, but he's not. He's concentrating on his interval.
Yeah, absolutely. He's concentrating on his interval. He really doesn't have time to look at anything else. But there was only like 2 to 3 seconds that he could look at there and see that airplane. So what I'm saying is that it's virtually impossible the P-63 pilot was doing what only thing he could do, and basically getting his spacing and hanging on where he should be. And as far as he thought, this is a photograph from one of the photographers in the crowd, and you can see the B-29's right there, waiting to take off. The Stearman's right here, already landed. He's in his landing roll, and there's number 2 Mustang, and then this is the accident sequence. Back here is
the remaining bombers.
SB2C, B-25. So maybe that is Yellow Rose. Maybe he just was so far back it wasn't a factor. Okay, so that's just prior, same photographer, long lens, just prior to impact. And they didn't publish any impact pictures, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, they didn't need to. And again, so they've got the belly of the P-63 staring down the B-17. He cannot see and avoid the B-17 at this point. The P-63 can simply not see him through the canopy of his aircraft. I mean, you have gone the broken formation rule number 1. You're belly up to the other aircraft.
Yeah, absolutely. And he didn't even know it. What I got circled there is the B-24. It looks like he's closer than he is. It's just a long lens, a really long lens, like 500 or maybe even 1,000. So it's foreshadowing the picture, but he's pretty far back. This is just at this impact point, or near just prior to the impact, right here.
That's the view from the. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that's
the view from the B-17 cockpit.
Yeah, and what you can see here is if you remember where the line is, the 1,000-foot line's right about there. So he's pretty close to lined up on it.
So he's lined up. The B-17 is lined up on the 1,000-foot line as directed by the air boss, which causes this crisscross, and you can see the fighters going into the 500-foot line, or the outside edge of the runway of the 500-foot line.
You would think so. And the reason I say that is...
Oh, look at that.
Yeah. This is actually the accident area right here. And you can see where the Stearman is right there. Number 4 is the lead Mustang there. The number 2 Mustang is there. There's the P-63 right here. And if you look at this diagram, that Mustang, the lead Mustang, is rolling out on the 1,000-foot line. And if you propagate his flight path, which they were able to do because they had the ADS-B, it goes the 1,000-foot line.
So there's massive confusion on behalf of the pilots as to what line they were all supposed to line up on in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that number 2 Mustang is trying to stay on what he thinks is a 500, but he's getting away from his lead. Lead is going through the whole time, and he's pretty much on the 1,000-foot line. So what that did was, and if you remember this is how I think the accident set up here, right up here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to talk about that for a second. As you can see in this turn, the brown is the P-63. He's getting his spacing and trail, because in this part of the turn right here is where they went to echelon, and now he just lags the turn right here. Number 3 just lags the turn, and he's going to get his spacing for trail. 2 does the same thing, and there's going to be good. But what he's doing is once he's in right echelon and he's looking down the formation, he can look down. It's only 200 or 300 feet, maybe less than 500 feet, and he can see the bombers.
So that's going to give him the warm fuzzy that he thinks that he is passing the bombers and is going to be well ahead of the bombers, and he has the airspace all to himself.
Exactly. He looks down there and he sees 3 bombers, and what he's seeing is a 4-engine airplane. It's the B-24.
Right. So he has not spotted the B-17.
He has not spotted the B-17. It's here. And it's very likely he may not have been able to see it because of the other airplanes, and his flight ahead of him were probably in his line of sight to see the B-17 in that box. So it's very likely he couldn't see it, but I guarantee you, if I was me on the outside of that formation looking, I'd spend a couple of seconds looking to see where the rest of the players are.
where the B-17 is. And this brings up to your point why the large spacing between the lead B-17 and the number 2 B-24 is a factor.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly it. Because he thinks more. He doesn't have much time.
This is all happening in seconds. We're clipping around here. What are we going speed-wise? 130 to 150 miles an hour?
The B-17 is doing about that. I think the fighters are accelerating right in here, and they're going up towards. They're going to end up over 200, 230 to something like that.
Oh boy!
So they're accelerating very quickly, and that's where 1 and 2 get all their spacing down here, is because they're accelerating like crazy. So
and descending.
Yeah. So they're accelerating very quickly, displacing in altitude. But I think the P-63 thinks, I know where the bombers are. And if you do that, when you look outside like that, you kind of have a picture of what the bank angle is, what their flight path is, especially in relation to each other. They're going to stay in trail. They're way outside me. The P-63 pilot, I firmly believe, was looking at that and said, these guys are not a factor to me. So I can do this spacing turn here without a problem.
So the air boss is creating this very complex maneuver on the fly, just talking it through to everybody. He's crisscrossing the aircraft without altitude deconfliction rules in place. It sounds to me like he's beginning to mix up the Tora Act with a parade in flight, which is 2 completely separate routines. Mission creep.
Absolutely. The Tora guys do a fantastic job, but they practice like crazy to do, and they're all altitude conflicted. In other words, it's all based on timing and altitude deconfliction and flight path deconfliction. It just looks really close, but they practice it enough that they hit their marks. It's just like acting, Whereas what's happened here is the air boss is saying that he wants, I can make it up as I go along, and I can orchestrate all these puppets out here and make a really complex show right in front of the crowd.
Without any formation flying experience of his own.
Yeah, and mixing these airplanes that have really, really different performance characteristics.
Dissimilar aircraft in formation, always a challenge.
Yeah. So let's see. I'll go back to share again real quick. This is an excellent graphic. You can see the big difference at impact right here. There's the B-24, and then there's the B-17. It's quite a bit of space.
So Craig never saw the B-17. If he did, it was much too late. I mean, right at impact possibly, but
I don't think so. I don't think he. If we go back to that picture, what he's doing is he's looking for lead.
Yep.
So the whole time he's thinking about these guys. So when I think about this, the lead Mustang is up here and he's higher. So what I'm thinking about is, okay, 2 looks a little bit outside of him and he's much lower. So, okay, what's lead doing? What's 2 doing? Are they going for the 500? Are they going for the 1,000-foot line? He said to go to the 500. In other words, there's a lot of stuff going on in his mind.
Man, to go to the outside edge of the 500-foot line. I mean, that's just confusing as heck.
Yeah, and with 2 different altitudes, because that's a significant altitude split between the lead Mustang and the number 2 Mustang. So there's a lot of stuff going on there, and I think he's doing the best he can.
So what's gone on with the organization, and what did Russell Royce, the air boss, have to say about all this 9 months later?
So they did a long interview with him, and 9 months after the accident, and I got to tell you, going through it, it's open public access. You can go read it and see for yourself. For me, it's incredible arrogance going through that. His answers he's just one of the few people, him and his dad, basically, are the only people that can orchestrate this hugely complex show. And I wonder, from my point of view, does the crowd really appreciate any of that? In other words, all these different airplanes in formation just barreling by it's so busy. What do I look at? What am I seeing? I think it's way too much. The Torah Act is a good one, but it's got a story behind it. This is just a bunch of airplanes flying really close together, real fast. What are they actually accomplishing? I just don't see it, honestly. Way too complex. And what happened is basically the reaction was for the International Council of Air Shows that run the Airbus program. They basically doubled their program directive. In other words, yeah, let's see, I've got that right here. This is the original one where the air bosses were vetted and given licenses from about 20 pages. It was kind of in detail, but not really. And then this is the next one that was the result of the accident. More than double the number of pages, goes into all kinds of different things, splits up the different kind of shows and the complexity of them, and how many different airplanes are there, and what they can do, and even goes down to the point of making you can't have nepotism when you recommend somebody to be an air boss.
That's what happened here. It was Russell got the job from his dad, who had been doing it for years there for the Commemorative Air Force.
True statement, yeah. So I didn't have that shared.
Did we get any feedback as to why none of the pilots spoke up at the briefing as to what the heck the plan was?
So the majority of people, that's the original Airbus program. That's the result of it here. Let's see, that's the original.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Get behind on my share, and then that's the result of it. So apparently there was some commentary and some confusion, and they after they got together and sorted out some conflict issues after the brief was over. But it had nothing to do, really, as far as I remember, about how the passes were going to be conducted. In other words, it was some issue about how they were going to manage it. Maybe in the B-29 and maybe in the B-24. I can't really remember. But it wasn't a factor to the air boss calling audibles on every pass. That wasn't what they objected to.
Was there some major organizational changes with the Commemorative Air Force following this accident?
Yeah, before the final report came out, about the time the docket came out, I guess maybe just before it, the CAF basically said that they're not going to do any of these kind of shows that Russell Royce did. You're not going to do those anymore with CAF airplanes.
Good.
And so they changed some of that. And there's the recommendations of the final report were to coordinate better between the ICAS and the players, FAA, and the CAF. And they said the CAF didn't have a very good risk management program, so the CAF worked on that. So those are the major changes there. Big changes in how they do the Airbus program, and they made it a currency issue. And you have to do X number of shows and all that.
The Airbus now has minimum currency requirements.
Yeah, they had a currency requirement from before in the original program, but it was very liberal. With the new program, it is very definitive.
Was there some management changes there at the Commemorative Air Force? Did somebody get sacked or anybody move on? Or
yeah, I'll mention that in just a second. I wanted to say also that the FAA or the NTSB had a recommendation with the FAA that the FAA be more involved with the Airbus and with the feedback and just be involved. So in other words, the FAA had people there, had inspectors at the show, but they weren't standing there with the air boss or paying attention to what was going on. So
yeah, and my experience at air shows, when the FAA is there, they are just monitoring the whole thing. They are not very proactive. Rarely do they make suggestions.
Which I don't necessarily have a problem with inserting them. I mean, I do have a problem with inserting them deeper because most of the time those people really don't have much experience.
They don't know what you're spending a lot of your time explaining to the FAA what's going on,
Yeah,
what we're doing here.
yeah. So I don't know how that part of it's going to work out, but so there nothing happened with the FAA. I mean, with the CAF, et cetera, for a pretty long time until I don't want to say in August, maybe. Hank Coates, who was the CEO of the CAF at the time, and he was a big Russell Royce fan. He's the guy that liked to have the tours going on during the show. He resigned.
Okay.
Appointed a new
Good.
CEO. The guy that took over as interim, who's been in CF a long time. They appointed him the CEO just recently, a few weeks ago.
Wow. Well, just a tragic, complicated sequence of events there. Thanks so much for helping us untangle the minute details. And just imagine doing that at 200 miles an hour. Things are just happening too fast, too much confusion,
Too many
just a disaster waiting to
moving
happen.
parts. One thing I don't think we talk, I do want to throw this in here. To me, this is stunning. So here I'm going to share it is part of the interview with the air boss.
Yeah, what did he have to say after the
Yeah. So the
disaster?
interview was 9 months after the accident. And this question right here was the NTSB human resource or human factors person. So she says, so you've had some time. I mean, it's been 9-ish months. It was a very tight knit community, very close. I do recognize and I do appreciate that. And this is a very difficult event. You've had some time to have some distance from. Has there been any sort of self reflection? Is there anything like tomorrow if you go had to go do the job again, go up your air stairs? Is there anything you do differently? Which, just between you and me, I think if you've been involved in an accident where 6 people died, you would do that. You would think about that. So here's his answer. Oh, of course, right? Like especially when you know the outcome, you'd always do things differently. So yeah, I mean, right? We can sit here and say, yeah, we just wouldn't fly, problem solved, right? Because you don't want to, but then you know the outcome. It's very easy to say that. So he didn't really answer the question.
No.
So she asked him again. She asked the question again, and this was his answer. He said, I've had a hard time answering that without thinking specifically to the accident. So what would I do differently? I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that right now. Sorry. I don't know how to answer that without giving you like 30 minutes of this is why basically we do things. So he wouldn't do anything different.
Hmm.
And
That's very obtuse. That's just
very, yeah. And I want to include a little bit more of that answer. It's in yellow.
yes.
And this is what disturbs me about the whole thing right here, because he goes in there about why it's a challenging question, and he says, but because it can be very late in the process or it can be very early in the process, and that's a pilot issue.
He just throws them under the bus.
What I hear there is he's throwing the pilots under the bus. It's all their fault. They didn't have see and avoid when he gave them no chance.
He gave them no chance to see and avoid each other because he has absolutely no formation experience of his own.
Or flying any of those airplanes.
Flying any of them. He's absolutely unqualified for the job.
Yeah. So that is the final report. I really expect more fallout in the future. What it's going to be, I don't know. But I mean, my heart goes out to the families of these folks because they're trying to do a good job.
Yeah. Yeah. The show does not need to go on, especially when it's that freaking confusing.
Yeah, and I don't see how the crowd would really get anything out of that.
Yeah.
You know, at least in the Torah show, they're narrating a story.
There's been a big mission creep in here. It used to be a parade of flight was simply a parade of flight, but they just wanted to make it more and more complicated for own personal egotistical reasons, unnecessarily complicated and dangerous.
Yeah, drama. drama.
Hmm.
So one fallout I don't have access to the Airboss records, but a friend does, and he checked for me, and Russell is not on the Airboss list anymore.
He
This is
better not be.
anecdotal. This is anecdotal, but he had been before, way before the final came out. He had done a couple more air shows. So
Yeah, he does not need to be in the air show business anymore,
no.
ever. Wow. Yep, we lost a lot of good folks on there. Len Root, my check airman, and the Airbus was the captain of the B-17, and just an absolute tragedy for all those folks.
I didn't know Lynn, but Terry Barker was a friend of mine. He was in the right seat.
Yeah, yeah, good folks, really good folks.
Yeah.
Put in an impossible situation.
Yeah, it's just terrible.
Yeah.
Well,
Very good. That was an excellent breakdown of all the minute details. It's once again, it's not just one simple thing. It's a whole string of events. All the holes in the Swiss cheese lining up at 200 miles an hour, leading to disaster very quickly.
definitely that. That's why you got to have. And oh, by the way, I think one of the things the FAA is saying is you got to have altitude deconfliction and you got to have flight path deconfliction. They made because they didn't say that before. Now it's just like, well, you should be smart.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
All should be in the briefing beforehand. Choreographed.
all right, well, great. Anything else you want to bring up? I think we beat this pretty good.
Oh, that was good. That was a good, detailed overview. I think folks will find that interesting.
All right. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on BS Works. Hopefully, a little quicker than between episode 5 and 6.
Very good, Scott. Thanks so much for digging into that report and helping us understand the minute details inside that report. Thank you so much for your support as well, and we'll see both of us back here.